Herbert's 100 Harem. It's a bit of an odd experience to be watching the girls through the camera drone following them, but Yzma had insisted he stay behind and learn to simply watch at times. "Come on, girls! We've got a big snake to smack!" one of them shouts out, and Herbert rolls his eyes. After the night of relaxation together, Baridzi was quickly back to business and was talking with a few girls that had come up to her when they had emerged from their movie marathon relating to everything to do with the man with the Batman. Thankfully, they also had the old Adam West stuff where it was all just goofy and feel-good silliness that let them just turn their brains off and stop worrying. "So why didn't you loan them that special gun of yours?" Baridzi asks Herbert, and he gives her a somewhat odd look. "It's still experimental. I've already filled out a report on its field performance, and I'll have to give it back when we get back to Centris," he answers. "A pity. A weapon like that looks like it would sell well." Baridzi notes, and Herbert smiles. "Even better, it's an ammunition-based piece of weaponry. So they buy the weapon and have to pay a little for each shot. Of course, the method will be inevitably cracked, but the official sales will still be a steady conveyor belt of funds," he answers. "That's good," Baridzi notes as she takes a bit of a breath. "Something wrong?" Herbert asks her, and she sighs a bit more fully. Well, Grandmother Yzma has helped out a lot already. But, well, now that I have more time for me, I've realized that I've been letting some important things slide to the side. My grades and my studies, for one. Are they salvageable? There's a lot of wriggle room compared to what I've heard about human studies, but I've got to crunch a lot if I'm going to catch back up," Baridzi admits, and Herbert pulls her close even as some of the girls point and mock as they see their sister wives struggle a little with numerous different handholds or footholds. They may be shielded from the heat, but it's clear that a lot of them just aren't as sure-footed as they normally are. "Do you think that they may be more nervous without me there?" Herbert asks her, and she nods. "A bit. It's probably hard for you to see it, but having you around really reassures us," Baridzi answers as she puts a hand on his shoulder. "You came back. In spite of everything that could go wrong actually going wrong, you came back." He doesn't tell her that he didn't really have a choice, that the sheer amount of laws that he'd been pigeonholed into and the lack of political capital Admiral Cistern had made sure he was stuck with them. Making the best of a bad situation was what he had to do, and yea, it had worked. Still, little white lies, or rather lies of omission, were sometimes better than the truth, especially in his field of work. The conversation between the two trails off a bit as the girls try sliding down the trail the way he was, and Herbert frowns. Why are they struggling? Or were they only making a point before of not looking bad when he was around? They do know he's watching, right? Maybe they don't. Things are quickly brought from somewhat embarrassing into interesting as one of the girls slips and falls to be caught by Yzma. She's brought up to the rest and a lecture is given out. There's no audio beyond the sheer roiling sound of the rising air, and from the expressions and body language of the girls, there's a fair amount being said to them. Although he can't hear the lecture, he can imagine it. The girls are at a moderate level of skill on an individual basis, but they're all far less prone to working together. The attack they did on the Maryatha had been surprising for that very reason. However, despite the potential they had showed then, they apparently needed to keep thinking of themselves as a team actively until such a time as they get things sorted out. He can almost read his name off their lips when the girls argue back a little, and it looks like Yzma is just shutting that down. Whatever she's saying, it's acting like a browbeating. After that, she turns around and starts leading them down through the trails the lava serpents had carved into the walls. After a bit, a few of them experiment again, and some start the grinding, sliding technique he was using earlier. "So is that normal?" Herbert asks, and Baridzi gives him a questioning look. "They fight well together, but they don't move together. Is this normal?" "Yes, it's very normal. Basically, the idea is that we all have our own ways of getting to someplace, but we all know what we have to do when we get there. Baridzi answers and he nods. I see. It makes sense, as a disunified group on the approach is less likely to scare something off, Herbert remarks as he sees the girls follow Yzma the tunnels to close in on an area before scattering a bit at her signal. The Skathak lava serpent is on the move, unlike his own. Its languid movements are seemingly slow, but with the sheer size of the creature and considering its burning trails in the walls of the canyon, dozens of meters long on both sides simultaneously. But that just means they have time to scatter and not be one large target like they were when he killed his. The only reason the serpent was even able to identify them as a threat was that they were bundled together and easier to see. Big eyes may be able to see more, but they see so much that small things get pushed aside. After all, it's hard to spot a fruit fly at any distance beyond a couple of feet, which is roughly the same scale as a human is to one of these gigantic monsters. Scattered around in a full-sized Zetan like Yzma is almost invisible to these things, let alone the smaller girls also around. They're going to look like little chunks of obsidian at a distance. Provided that their axiom signatures aren't completely over the top, then they'll blend in flawlessly, which is why scattering is so important when dealing with things of such magnitude. Yes, bigger opponents are a great deal harder to fell, but they have a hard time even noticing a smaller foe until grievous damage has already been done. It was like being infected, although with that train of thought isn't getting sick proportionally similar to fighting a deep space leviathan. Now, wouldn't that be an interesting hunt? Herbert makes a point of pushing aside the mental image of a flu virus trying to attack him with spaceships to do more damage. The girls jump around and get closer to their target in bursts and in a large scattered formation. A readout of the communication chatter has him know that the girls are doing a lot of joking around, and there are a few comparisons of the lava serpent to his own equipment. He readjusts the way he's sitting now that attention is drawn to it. They prepare weapons in the form of glacier guns. They were the closest things the girls could get to having his caster gun out there without an entire flurry of paperwork. The serpent suddenly pauses as it senses danger. Someone takes that as a cue to take a shot, and the serpent, of course, dodges. It then flashes forward and the girl who took the shot cowers, but the serpent does not see her. She is too small, too well blended in with the environment that even though the enormous beast senses danger, it can't pin her down. Wonderful. It can't tell the difference between a person's axiom presence and an animal's, can it? Herbert muses out loud. Apparently not. Few animals can, and those that do are either very tame or at the cusp of being more than animals. Baridzi remarks. Puris, for example, are generally so tame they can tell your moods from the axiom around you. A fair survival mechanism when their food and shelter depends on the happiness of an emotional predator. Herbert says more to fill the air than anything. Baridzi had brought up a program that had her reading over a series of business reports as part of a test. Apparently, she's going into the finance sector for her big idea on how to make money. Hunting is just a family thing for her to do, not a lifestyle. As the serpent weaves around to try and find the danger, there's another attack, then another, and then another from different directions. It's just like with the Mar Yatha. Once the girls are on the attack, they know exactly how to gang up on someone for maximum effectiveness. The hunt turns into a one-sided slaughter as the serpent is not given the room to dodge and part of its body is frozen solid. It tries to scream in pain, but the loss of coordination and flexibility in a major part of its length causes the beast to slip. As it falls, it eats several more shots, and by the time it slams against a ledge, it's cold enough to simply shatter. Hunt over. His girls have won. There's a quick celebration that goes around, but then Yzma sends out a challenge to the rest. They start following her down, further and further, closer and closer to the magma below. The camera won't follow past a certain point as the automatic drone simply can't withstand the heat and instead zooms in, making it so that there's more and more interference to what's being shown. It does show them going down into a strange area made of an entire field of broken obsidian glass. There's some digging and then some pulling, but then the goal is revealed. Eggs. Gigantic round, semi-transparent lava serpent eggs. She then has each one marked with a tracker and the ship goes all the way down to retrieve them. A living serpent may be a bit much to capture, but the eggs, they could be sold high. Mostly because the extremely dangerous creatures were still being studied, and that was coupled with more bleeding heart individuals feeling sympathy for living natural disasters because, apparently, even beings that destroy the biosphere of their homeworld over and over again deserve a chance. Granted, seeing the worm sort of bunched up inside their partially transparent prisons did engender a bit of sympathy, but not enough for Herbert to consider leaving them alive. They were dangerous. Even freshly hatched, they were hot enough to leave a wake of slag in their trail and aggressive enough to kill anything that moved, while also being small enough to truly perceive a human scale, meaning an active rather than passive threat to a person. A Scathach lava serpent will set the world on fire when fully grown, but a hatchling will hunt you down specifically because it can see you. The video feed cuts out as everyone enters the ship after the eggs are secured in a specially heated cargo hold and the drone is swiftly retrieved. The girls are on their way back. They're good in an ambush, but they need to learn to move together in something other than a disorganized mob. Herbert considers as he contemplates the hows. Maybe if we were to turn defenestration nation trips into team battles rather than free-for-alls or 100 versus 1, Barizi asks him and Herbert nods. Right, bad habits aren't just fixed in a day. Herbert notes and Barizi immediately turns off her little training program in favor of a schedule program, which he then covers up with his hand after she starts the first couple of notes. We're on vacation. Calm down and relax. You need this vacation as much, if not more than anyone else. But relax. We hit defenestration nation all the time. The little note to do things as teams is a good one and all you need. Just relax, he tells her, and she sighs before nodding. The communicator is tucked away and she tucks herself closer to him. The girls did well, she says. Yes, they did, Herbert confirms. Well enough that Grandmother Yzma will be content? Who can say? She's older than me on a scale I barely understand, so just seeing a little improvement might be enough, or it might be nowhere near enough. We can only wait and see, Herbert says patiently. You do know that she's going to have the girls a lot more involved in your hunts now, right? Probably, but I need to learn to work with teams more anyways. It just helps with both my skills and with how we all work together. She wants to make me into more than a hunter. She wants me as a patriarch. You already are, she says, and he squeezes her a little closer.